Imagine a man so wealthy, his casual generosity crashed the economy of an entire region for over a decade. Imagine a king whose procession included 60,000 people, 12,000 servants dressed in silk, and 80 camels each carrying 300 pounds of pure gold. This isn't fantasy, this isn't exaggeration. This is the true story of Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali, a man historians believe was the richest person who has ever lived. His wealth, an estimated $400 billion in today's money. But here's what makes his story even more remarkable. Most people have never heard of him. In 1324, Mansa Musa left his kingdom in West Africa and began a pilgrimage to Mecca that would become the stuff of legend. His journey would take him across the Sahara, through the great cities of North Africa, and into the heart of the Islamic world. And everywhere he went, he would leave a trail of gold that would be remembered for centuries. But to understand Mansa Musa, we must first understand the empire he ruled. The Mali Empire wasn't some small kingdom on the edge of civilization. It was a superpower, controlling an area larger than Western Europe, dominating the gold trade that fueled the medieval world economy, and developing one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. This is a story about wealth beyond imagination, about power that stretched across a continent, about generosity so extreme it became an economic weapon. But most importantly, this is a story that reveals a truth your history textbooks likely never told you. Africa wasn't waiting to be discovered. Africa wasn't primitive. Africa was rich, sophisticated, and powerful. The sources for this story come from the accounts of Arab scholars who witnessed Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, from the oral traditions preserved in West Africa, and from the archaeological evidence that continues to be uncovered today. What they reveal is a civilization that reached heights of wealth and learning that rivaled anything in Europe or Asia at the time. So let's journey back to the 14th century, to a time when Europe was struggling through the Middle Ages, when the Black Death was about to devastate the continent, when knights and castles dominated the landscape. While all of this was happening, in West Africa, an empire was reaching its golden age, and at its center sat a man who would become a legend. This is the story of Mansa Musa, the Golden King of Mali. Our story begins not with Mansa Musa, but with the land that would make him wealthy beyond measure. West Africa in the 13th century was a region of extraordinary natural wealth. The Niger River provided water and fertile soil. The savanna grassland supported agriculture and livestock. But beneath the ground and in the rivers lay something even more valuable: gold. The gold fields of West Africa were the richest in the world. For centuries, gold from this region had flowed north across the Sahara, fueling the economies of North Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. But the kingdoms that controlled this gold were about to change. The Ghana Empire, which had dominated the region for centuries, was collapsing. And from its ashes, a new power was rising. In 1235, a warrior prince named Sundiata Keita defeated the brutal sorcerer king Sumaoro Kante at the Battle of Kirina. This wasn't just a military victory, it was the birth of an empire. Sundiata united the Mandinka people and established the Mali Empire. He created a constitution, the Kurukan Fuga, that established laws, protected property rights, and even outlined environmental protections. This wasn't a primitive society, this was sophisticated governance. Under Sundiata and his successors, Mali grew rapidly. The empire controlled the gold-producing regions of Bambouk and Bure. It controlled the salt mines of Tagaza in the Sahara. And it controlled the trade routes that connected them. This was the key to Mali's wealth. They controlled both sides of the most important trade network in Africa. You see, in the medieval world, salt was as valuable as gold. In the hot climate of West Africa, salt was essential for preserving food and maintaining health. Meanwhile, the kingdoms of North Africa desperately needed gold. Mali sat in between. Gold from the south was traded for salt from the north, and Mali took a cut of everything. It was the perfect economic position. By the late 13th century, Mali wasn't just wealthy, it was powerful. The empire stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the edges of modern-day Niger, from the Sahara Desert in the north to the forests of the south. It encompassed hundreds of cities and towns, millions of people, and controlled more gold than anywhere else on earth. The throne of Mali passed through several capable rulers, but in 1312 something unprecedented happened. The reigning emperor, Abu Bakr II, became obsessed with exploration. According to the accounts, he wanted to know what lay beyond the Atlantic Ocean. So he assembled a fleet of 2,000 ships, appointed his deputy Mansa Musa as regent, and sailed west. He never returned, and suddenly Mansa Musa found himself emperor of one of the most powerful nations on earth. Mansa Musa was not born to be emperor. He was from the royal family, certainly, but he had served as deputy, not heir. Yet when Abu Bakr II disappeared across the Atlantic, Musa found himself thrust into power, and he would prove to be everything an emperor should be: a skilled administrator, a patron of learning, a devout Muslim, and a military strategist. Musa's first years as emperor focused on consolidation and expansion. He expanded Mali's borders, conquering 24 cities, including the legendary trading center of Gao. He established diplomatic relations with other Islamic kingdoms. He reformed the administrative system, organizing the empire into provinces with appointed governors. This wasn't a king sitting on a throne collecting tribute. This was an active, engaged ruler building a sophisticated state. But the source of Musa's legendary wealth was always the gold. The mines of Bambouk and Bure produced an estimated 1 ton of gold annually. In today's money, that's about $60 million worth of gold every single year. And that was just official production. The actual amount was probably much higher. All of it flowed to the emperor's treasury. Chroniclers from the period describe Mansa Musa's wealth in terms that strain belief. One reported that the emperor owned a gold nugget so large it took multiple strong men to lift it. Another claimed that Musa's palace had windows framed in pure gold. Were these exaggerations? Perhaps. But the archaeological evidence supports the basic truth. This was wealth on a scale that's hard for us to comprehend today. But Mansa Musa was more than just wealthy. He was a devout Muslim in a position that combined both temporal and spiritual authority. Islam had been spreading through West Africa for centuries, brought by traders and scholars. Musa embraced the faith completely, and in 1324 he decided it was time to fulfill one of Islam's 5 pillars: the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. For a Muslim ruler, the Hajj was both a religious obligation and a political statement. It demonstrated piety, established connections with other Islamic rulers, and showcased the wealth and power of one's kingdom. Previous Malian rulers had made the journey, but none would do it like Mansa Musa was about to do it. Musa began preparations for a journey unlike any the world had ever seen. He would take 60,000 people with him. 12,000 would be personal servants, each dressed in silk and carrying 4 pounds of gold. He would take 80 to 100 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of gold. He would take his senior wife, Inari Kunate, and 500 of her servants and slaves, scholars, soldiers, officials, doctors. This wasn't just a pilgrimage, this was a moving city. This was a demonstration of power that would echo through history. In 1324, Mansa Musa's caravan departed from Niani. The procession stretched for miles. Heralds announced the emperor's presence. Soldiers maintained order. Griots, the traditional storytellers and historians of West Africa, sang songs celebrating the journey. And at the center of it all, Mansa Musa rode, surrounded by his officials and advisors, beginning a 4,000-mile journey across the Sahara Desert. The first leg of the journey took them across the Sahara, one of the harshest environments on Earth. This wasn't a journey for the unprepared. The caravan traveled in stages, moving from oasis to oasis. Each stop required advanced preparation by scouts who ensured water and supplies would be available. The organization required to move 60,000 people across a desert speaks to the administrative sophistication of the Mali Empire. Along the way, Mansa Musa stopped at every settlement and city, and at each stop he did something remarkable. He gave away gold, not small amounts, massive quantities. He built mosques, he gave gifts to local rulers, he distributed gold to the poor. Arab chroniclers watching this procession were stunned. They'd never seen anything like it. When the caravan reached Cairo, Egypt, the medieval world's greatest metropolis, the city went into shock. The Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad ibn Qalawun, one of the most powerful rulers in the Islamic world, invited Mansa Musa to meet him. According to protocol, Musa should have prostrated himself before the Sultan. But Musa refused. He would bow only to Allah, he said, not to any earthly ruler. This was a diplomatic crisis, but Musa handled it with skill. He explained his position with such eloquence and backed it with such obvious wealth and power that the Sultan accepted it. The two rulers became friends. They exchanged gifts. The Sultan gave Musa several buildings and properties in Cairo. And Musa gave gold, lots of gold. During his 3 months in Cairo, Mansa Musa's generosity became legendary and then disastrous. He gave gold to everyone. Officials, merchants, beggars, scholars. He purchased supplies for his caravan, paying in gold. He commissioned art and architecture, paying in gold. He spent so lavishly, gave away so much, that he fundamentally altered Cairo's economy. Here's what happened. Basic economics. When you flood a market with gold, gold becomes less valuable. The price of gold in Cairo dropped by 25%. This doesn't sound catastrophic until you realize that gold was the basis of the entire monetary system. Everything became more expensive. The cost of living skyrocketed, and this inflation lasted for over a decade. One man's generosity had accidentally crashed an economy. From Cairo, Musa continued to Mecca, completing his Hajj. He prayed at the Kaaba. He performed the rituals required of all pilgrims, but even here, his wealth set him apart. He donated to schools and mosques. He met with scholars from across the Islamic world. He commissioned buildings. Everywhere he went, he left a lasting impression. On his return journey through Cairo, Musa learned what his generosity had done. The economy was in chaos, and here we see another side of this remarkable ruler. He felt responsible. So he did something almost unheard of. He borrowed gold from Cairo's moneylenders at high interest rates, taking gold out of circulation to try to restore its value. It's unclear if this worked, but the attempt shows something important. Mansa Musa wasn't just wealthy, he was economically sophisticated enough to understand what he'd done and try to fix it. The Arab chroniclers couldn't stop writing about Mansa Musa. Al-Umari, writing 12 years after the pilgrimage, interviewed people who had witnessed it. He recorded their stories of the African emperor whose wealth eclipsed imagination. Ibn Battuta, the great traveler, visited Mali a few years after Musa's death and found people still talking about him. Ibn Khaldun, one of history's first social scientists, analyzed the economic impact of Musa's journey. These weren't legends. These were documented historical accounts. The economic disruption caused by Mansa Musa's pilgrimage extended far beyond Cairo. Gold was the international currency of the medieval world. When its value dropped in Cairo, one of the world's major trading hubs, the effects rippled outward. Merchants adjusted their prices. Trade routes shifted. Other kingdoms found their gold reserves suddenly worth less. One man's generosity had triggered what we might today call an international financial crisis. In Europe, where gold from West Africa was essential for coinage, people noticed. European maps from after 1324 begin to show a figure in West Africa. A king sitting on a throne, holding a gold nugget. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, one of the most important maps of the medieval period, depicts Mansa Musa prominently, calling him the Lord of the Blacks of Guinea and showing him holding an enormous nugget of gold. Europe knew about Mansa Musa. They knew where the gold came from. They just couldn't get to it. This is crucial to understanding later history. When European explorers began sailing down the African coast in the 15th century, they weren't just exploring. They were trying to find the source of West Africa's gold. They'd been hearing about it for generations. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage had advertised West Africa's wealth to the entire medieval world. But let's understand the scale of what we're talking about. Modern economists have attempted to calculate Mansa Musa's wealth. The estimates vary wildly, but most agree on a figure that's almost meaningless in its size, around $400 billion in today's money. To put that in perspective, the richest person alive today has a net worth of about $200 billion. Mansa Musa may have been twice as wealthy. And he gave so much away during one pilgrimage that it destabilized international markets. The question naturally arises, where did all this wealth go? Mansa Musa didn't hoard it. He spent it. He gave it away. He invested it. And when he returned to Mali, he brought something with him that would prove just as valuable as gold: knowledge, architecture, and scholars who would transform his empire into one of the world's great centers of learning. When Mansa Musa returned to Mali in 1325, he brought with him architects, scholars, and poets from across the Islamic world. He'd seen the great cities of North Africa and the Middle East. He'd seen their mosques, their universities, their architecture. And he wanted to bring that sophistication to West Africa. Not to copy it, but to merge it with African traditions and create something unique. His first major project was transforming Timbuktu from a trading outpost into a city of learning. He commissioned the Sankor Mosque, designed by the Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. But this wasn't just a mosque, it became the center of Sankor University, one of the world's great centers of learning. At its height, it housed over 25,000 students and one of the largest libraries in the world. The manuscripts of Timbuktu covered every field of knowledge: astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, literature, history. Scholars came from across Africa and the Islamic world to study there. They debated philosophy, they calculated astronomical tables, they wrote commentaries on religious texts, they practiced surgery. This wasn't a primitive backwater. This was a center of intellectual achievement that rivaled any university in Europe. Mansa Musa also rebuilt cities across his empire. Gao, which he'd conquered earlier in his reign, received new mosques and palaces. Jenne, another great city, flourished. The empire's infrastructure expanded. Roads improved, security increased, trade flourished. Under Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire reached its golden age, in every sense of that phrase. Mansa Musa ruled until 1337, a reign of 25 years. When he died, he left behind an empire at peace, prosperous, and intellectually vibrant. His sons and successors continued his policies, though none would match his legendary status. So why don't we know this story? Why isn't Mansa Musa as famous as Julius Caesar or Genghis Khan? Why don't our textbooks spend chapters on the Mali Empire? The answer is uncomfortable but important. For centuries, African history was deliberately erased, minimized, or ignored by European scholars who couldn't reconcile advanced African civilizations with their justifications for colonialism and slavery. But history has a way of surviving. The manuscripts of Timbuktu survived. The oral traditions survived. The archaeological evidence survived. And now, finally, historians are telling the full story. Mansa Musa wasn't an exception. He was an example of what Africa achieved while Europe was struggling through its dark ages. The story of Mansa Musa teaches us that wealth means nothing without wisdom, that generosity can be a form of power, that Africa's history is humanity's history, and that the greatest treasures aren't always made of gold. They're made of knowledge, culture, and the stories we pass down through generations. This was Mansa Musa, the Golden King of Mali, the man who broke Egypt's economy, the richest person who ever lived. Remember his name. Thank you for watching History Doc Journo. Subscribe for more untold stories from ancient African history, because history belongs to everyone.